Hi, I know there are a couple of people who want to find a tutorial on how to use Unity to do user interfaces other than just for games, and in your games those user interfaces are really quite useful. So what I've got is just going to do a simple user interface that I'm going to set up and introduce three of the major components that can be used, 3 or 4 of the major components that can be used to do that. So eventually my Unity engine will start to load and I'll be able to introduce things. Now, when you start coding the interface, you need to be able to use C#, and in the C# libraries, the Unity engine library is automatically there, but if you want to use the UI engine, you have to add that specifically. So what I'm actually going to do is to create a new task, and I'm going to put it into this folder that I've got here, UI tutorial, and I'm going to do it, I'm going to call it something like simple UI. I'm going to add it as a 3D, but you can use them in 2D and projects as well. So create the project, and it'll go chunter for a while. Import the small assets and so on, and eventually it will come up with the same interface that you've seen in any game making tutorial or even in my lecture. I should really cut these bits out while we wait. Maybe I'll do that in an editor later. Well, if you've waited that long, we now have the Unity editor set up. As before, with other things, I align the view to the camera just so we can get a preview of what's going to go on. Now, to do UI elements, what we do is to add a game object of type UI, and you'll see it here, UI. We've got all these sorts of things. The simplest ones are text, then there's images and such like, sliders and all sorts of things you can use. And they all basically work the same way. But the main thing that I like to have to start with is a canvas. The canvas identifies where everything's going to go, and I could align myself to that, but I'm going to just show you the game window in a moment when we've done that. So the canvas is here. This also introduces an event system where you have to have these horizontal, vertical, submit and cancel defined. If you've redefined those, then you're going to need to redefine them for the event system. If you haven't redefined them, they should already be defined, and the place they're defined is in project settings and input and axes, and you'll find down here at the bottom there's submit and cancel. So there we go, and they have been defined in this particular case. So on my canvas, I'm now going to add some other UI objects, and the main UI objects I'm going to put in are an input field, and that's that one. And I'm going to put in, if we look at the game object, we can see that's been placed in the middle of the place. Over here we have where it's been anchored, and it's been anchored to 0, 0, 0. I can move it up and down using this. So if I make it 100, it's slightly higher. I can also anchor it at different places on the canvas, and I could do that by I think it's so I can do either top left, top middle, whatever. I'll just leave it where it is at the moment because that's good enough. Close that up, don't need that one. We can do things like colour the input field, we can put images on it. At the moment we're going to do no such thing. Now inside it there's a text component, and if you open this up here, the text in the text component is set over here, and it currently is defaulting. Oh, and there's a placeholder, and the placeholder is defaulting also to enter text, so that's quite useful. So that's the input field. Now in the input field you want to get at the text that it contains later. Now what I'm going to do is have a label down here. So what I need to do now is add to my canvas, I'm going to add another UI object, which is going to be the text component, and that's come out down here. Now it's going to say new text unless you put something else there. It uses font size 14. You can go up to size 28, but if you put it up to size 28 you'll find it seems to disappear, and that's because the vertical overflow is set to truncate. If you allow it to overflow, the text reappears. You can also set this to wrap, and you can center this text. So that's that one. What we're going to do in this is to write a program that will allow you to enter text here, press a button, and the text will transfer over here. It's a very simple UI, but it covers a lot of the different things you need to do with your UIs. And most important of all is that that will also cover what happens when you press a button, for example. So here's a simple button. Immediately it's been placed in the middle of the screen, right on top of that. So I'm going to move it up. Now I can either in the scene, if I can find the scene components over here, I could physically shift the thing upwards, or I can adjust this Y position and I can then put it somewhere more exact. So if I put it to 50. Right, so now I've got the button. What I want to do is to make the button do something, and in here, I think it's in here, you've got the ability to add a what happens when you click the button. So what I'm going to do is get the button click to call a method, a function, which I'm going to now add as a new script. So first of all I'm going to add the script, so the component, come down here and add a new script, and I'll call it button press, which is pretty boring. Right, create an add. Now on here I think it is, you can now add the idea of the button press being the thing that you do, but at the moment there's no functions added to it, so the only functions are things which belong to a standard game object type things. But what we want to do is make it call a function that we actually need. So I'm going to double click on button press, and on this system I've got Visual Studio as my editor. So Visual Studio opens, and for this particular thing I don't need either of these, so I'm going to delete those. And then up here at the moment I've got using Unity Engine, and I need to add using Unity Engine .ui. Now at the moment that's going to come out grayed out, and this little idea thing here is going to say, hey, you don't need that because you're not using it, but I'm about to use it. So down here I'm going to make two public things, one of which is the text, and I'll be inventive and call it the text. And now you'll see that the Unity Engine.ui thing is no longer grayed out, because we're actually using it. And the other thing we want is a input field, and I'm going to call it the input. Now we need a method that's we're going to an action that we're going to call when we press the button, and it needs to be public. It doesn't need to return anything, I hope, because it won't go wrong. And I'm going to call it on button press. And what this is going to do is get, I'm going to make a string, which is the input dot txt. I think that's right. Oops, no, I need to define the string, the text, equal to the input.text there. And then I'm going to transfer that to the output. So, whoops, I've called the string the text. I've got to call it something else, the text string. There we go, don't want to confuse the thing. And now we make the text equal to the text string. Now that's slightly more than we needed to do. Oops, the text dot text needs to be equal to the text string. We could have put the text dot text equals the input dot text, but I like to do this just to make sure I know what I'm doing. Okay, we can now save that. And now we've added an on button press method in here. So what I'm going to do, close that down. Down here, there should actually now be a function called down here on the button press as on button press, this one here, right? So now when we press the button, that method should run. So let's see if it works. At the moment it says enter text and new text in there. Let's run it, and if we've got everything right, it will have that in the window. And let me put hello Peter as the stuff, and then press the button, and something went wrong. Of course it did. It doesn't have a clue what those two fields are. So what I failed to do was over here in button press, these things don't have meanings. So the input field here needs to go into there, and the text thing needs to go into there. And now the computer should be able to work out what I'm trying to do. Try and run it again. And this time we're going to put hello Peter, press the button, and hello Peter comes out. Let's just correct that. Hello Peter, press the button. Okay, now the only thing I wanted to do different to this is that I didn't want the button to say button. So let's just change that. So go back here, click on button, and you'll see down here it has a text component as well, and we can make the button text be make it transfer text like that. Now it looks more sensible. And Hello Peter, transfer text, hello Peter. So that's that one. Obviously there are more complex things you can use. You can add all sorts of things like checkboxes, sliders, scroll bars, drop down choice things. Panels are quite useful, so you don't have to have the skybox behind you, and so on. But all of those, a lot of all the components for it are on online. If we just go to the button, this also gives you an idea. Down here, the button has this image on it. You can change the image, so you can have picture buttons that say things in there. You can also do things like change the color of the button, and I think you can change, you certainly can change what happens to the button as you do the thing. So normal color, highlighted color, and pressed color, you can change all of those. So once it's pressed, it might change to a different color. Hello, why is, oh, there we are. So let's get it to change to pretty yellowy color when it's been pressed. Okay, let's have a go. So at the moment it should start off with the default color, and then we put in some text. Go yellow. And then we transfer the text, and did you see it transferred and it went yellow? How lovely. Right, we can also have it disabled, enabled, and so on and so forth. That's all. Thank you.